Beneath the soft winter lights of a Vermont town, a retired Navy SEAL was driving home alone. Then a cry rose from an abandoned clay pit, faint enough for most people to miss. At the bottom, he found an old homeless man trapped in the snow. Beside him was a wounded German shepherd, wrapped in a torn sack, still trying to stand guard. The dog's collar carried the name Morrow, and a mark from a charity everyone in town trusted. But some acts of kindness are only masks, and some forgotten souls are buried where the lights don't reach. Stay with this story, and tell us where you're watching from tonight. Rowan Mercer had always preferred the hour just before dusk. In Brightwater Hollow, Vermont winter did not fall all at once. It gathered. It settled on rooftops, pine boughs, fence rails, and the shoulders of men who had learned not to complain about weight. By 4 in the afternoon, the whole town looked as if some careful hand had dusted it with powdered sugar. The windows along Main Street burned gold. Smoke lifted from chimneys in soft blue ribbons. The frozen lake beyond the church steeple held the last pale light like a mirror, too tired to shine. Rowan liked that hour because people were going home. He was good at helping people. He was less good at being helped. At 51, Rowan Mercer had the broad-shouldered build of a man who had spent his life carrying things no one else wanted to lift. He stood a little over 6 feet, with a face shaped by weather, discipline, and a grief that had never learned proper manners. His hazel, gray eyes missed very little. His brown ash hair, cut short without vanity, had gone silver at the edges. A narrow scar crossed his left brow, and the bridge of his nose sat just slightly off-center, as if even his bones had once taken orders and refused to break completely. That afternoon, he wore his usual olive-drab combat shirt, the fitted body plain and practical, the camouflage sleeves marked by dark horizontal bands around the upper arms. Over it, he had pulled on a faded field jacket and gloves that had seen more winters than some men saw honest days. He had spent the last 3 hours behind the community warming station, coaxing life back into a stubborn generator that sounded like a mule with a smoking habit. Gloria Madsen from the Maple Lantern Diner had tried to make him stay for soup. Rowan had refused. She had called him an ungrateful old fence post. He had told her fence posts were useful. She had thrown a biscuit at him. That was Brightwater Hollow's way of loving a man who would not stand still long enough to be loved properly. Rowan lived alone in a log house at the edge of the old forest, where the road narrowed and the pines grew thick enough to make the wind speak in a lower voice. He had no family waiting there. No wife, no children, no brother who called on Sundays. No one who asked him why some mornings found him standing in the kitchen with one hand braced on the sink, breathing like he had just outrun a war. He told himself he liked it that way. Most days, he even believed it. People in town knew him anyway. They knew he shoveled the church steps before sunrise. They knew he carried flour sacks for Gloria when the delivery truck got stuck. They knew he fixed Widow Hargrove's porch rail and refused the jar of peach preserves she tried to press into his hands. They knew he left firewood outside the old train depot where the unhoused sometimes slept, though he never admitted it. They knew his truck before they knew his voice. A dark green pickup with a cracked rear mud flap, a tow rope behind the seat, and a toolbox organized with the grim precision of a man who believed chaos was a personal insult. Rowan guided the truck out of town, tires hissing softly over packed snow. Behind him, Brightwater Hollow glowed in the rearview mirror, warm and harmless, looking a town of wreaths and steeples, of maple smoke and bakery windows, of neighbors who waved with mittened hands. He lifted one hand from the wheel in return. A small gesture, enough to be polite, not enough to invite anyone closer. The road curved past the frozen mill pond, then climbed toward the old clay works. Years ago, men had dug red earth from that slope and hauled it down to the brickyard. Now the pit sat abandoned beyond the tree line, half swallowed by birch saplings and snowdrifts. Most people avoided that stretch after dark, not because of ghosts, though Otis Bell claimed the place had plenty, but because the ground sank strangely underfoot, and the wind there always sounded like it was looking for a name. Rowan was almost at the turnoff to his cabin when he heard it. At first, He thought it was the belt in his engine. A thin, broken sound. Then it came again. Help! Rowan's boot hit the brake before thought finished forming. The truck slid half a foot, corrected, and stopped crooked on the shoulder. Snow drifted over the windshield in lazy flakes. He killed the engine and listened. For a moment, there was only wind moving through the pines. Then another cry came from below the road, faint but human. Somebody please. Rowan stepped out into the cold. His right hand moved automatically toward the flashlight clipped near his belt. His eyes scanned the road, the trees, the slope. No fresh tire tracks on the main road except his own and two older sets half filled with snow. But off to the left, near the chained entrance to the old clay access road, the snow had been disturbed. Deep tire marks cut through the white, leading down toward the pit. Rowan stood very still. People did not use that road by accident. He took the tow rope, a medical kit, and a heavy flashlight from the truck. Then he climbed over the sagging chain and followed the tracks down. The old access road twisted through scrub pine and frozen weeds. Snow brightened everything but softened nothing. The world looked clean from a distance, but close-up Rowan could see broken beer bottles in the ditch, old pallet wood, black plastic bags stiff with ice. Brightwater Hollow kept its face pretty. Every town did. The unwanted things always found their own congregation beyond the last street lamp. Halfway down the slope, he heard a cough. "Otis?" Rowan called. There was a pause. Then a voice answered, cracked and embarrassed. "That you, Mercer?" Rowan moved faster. The clay pit opened below him like a wound in the earth. Its sides were steep, red-brown where the snow had failed to cling, slick with frozen runoff. Near the bottom, in the blue-gray shadow, an old man sat wedged against a clay shelf with one leg bent awkwardly beneath him. Otis Bell. He was wrapped in 3 coats, none of them the same decade. A burgundy scarf hung loose at his throat, and his beard was frosted white around his mouth. His tin cup lay a few feet away, half buried in snow, looking as offended as Otis usually did. Rowan's chest tightened with relief and irritation, which were often brothers in his heart. "You pick strange places to nap," Rowan called down. Otis coughed, then gave a weak laugh. "View's terrible, service is worse. Are you hurt? Pride's dead, hip's angry. Rest of me is still negotiating." Rowan was already anchoring the rope around the trunk of a birch near the rim. Then he saw the burlap sack beside Otis. It moved, not much, just a shudder beneath dirty fabric. Rowan froze. "What's in the bag?" Otis's humor vanished. The old man looked down at the sack, and something like fear crossed his weathered face. "That's why I went down." The sack gave another small movement. Then came a sound so quiet it was almost swallowed by the pit. A dog's breath, painful, ragged. Alive, Rowan descended carefully, boots finding holds in the frozen clay. Twice the ground shifted under him. Once his knee struck stone hard enough to send a flash of pain up his thigh. He ignored it. By the time he reached the bottom, Otis was trying to pull the sack closer with shaking hands. "Don't," Rowan said gently. "Let me." He crouched beside the burlap. The smell hit first, wet fur, blood, fear, cold earth. Rowan pulled his knife and cut the rope cinched around the sack. A German shepherd lay inside. Male, maybe 6 years old, black and gold coat dulled by mud and snow, too thin under the winter fur. His right shoulder was torn open, not deep enough to be immediately fatal but ugly and angry. One hind leg was tucked wrong beneath him, trembling around his neck. Beneath the old leather collar, the fur was rubbed raw in a tight ring, not from falling, from being restrained. Rowan's jaw hardened. The dog opened his eyes. Amber clear. Not vacant, not wild. Those eyes fixed on Rowan with such deliberate focus that, for one strange second, the pit seemed to fall silent around them. No wind, no trees, no Otis breathing hard beside him. Just that gaze. It was not the look of an animal begging. It was the look of a sentry deciding whether the man before him deserved to pass. Rowan lowered his hand, palm down, slow enough to be understood. "Easy," he murmured. Nobody's asking you for trust you don't have." The shepherd's nostrils moved. He did not growl. He did not lick Rowan's fingers. He simply watched. Otis whispered, "See, told you. That one's got a whole church bell ringing behind his eyes." Rowan glanced at him. "What happened?" Otis swallowed. His face had gone pale under the dirt and cold. "I was at the old way station. Wind's not so bad there if you sleep behind the scale house. Heard engines, 2 black SUVs came down the access road. Big ones, clean, not hunters, not kids." Rowan looked up at the tire tracks above them. "How many men?" "4, maybe 5, dressed like security, dark coats, gloves. One of them had a shaved head, moved like he owned the ground." Otis rubbed a shaking hand over his mouth. "They carried that sack. It was moving some then. One said something like, 'He won't last the night.' Then they tossed it down here." Rowan felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with Winter. "You saw their faces?" "Not clear. I stayed low." "I ain't brave, Rowan. Don't make me into some old prophet." Otis gave a bitter smile. "But after they left, I heard him. Little bark, not loud, like he was ashamed to ask." Rowan looked back at the dog. The shepherd's eyes had shifted toward the slope, toward the road where the vehicles had gone. His battered body tensed, even hurt, even half. Frozen, he placed his front paws under himself and tried to rise. "No," Rowan said. "Stay down." The command came out low, instinctive, shaped by years of giving orders when hesitation could kill. The shepherd stopped. Not collapsed, not flinched, stopped, Rowan noticed. So did Otis. "Well," the old man rasped, "that ain't exactly a parlor trick." Rowan reached carefully for the collar. The dog allowed it, though every muscle in his body remained ready. The leather was old, high quality, cracked at the edges but once cared for. A small metal plate hung beneath the buckle, dulled by weather. Rowan wiped mud away with his thumb. Morrow below the name was a tiny engraved laurel branch, and beneath that, Vale Winter House. Otis saw Rowan's face change. "You know it?" "Everybody knows it," Rowan said. The words tasted different down in that pit. Vale Winter House was the bright name on donation banners, on soup drives, on the Christmas lights strung across Main Street, on the polished brass plaque beside the town hall entrance, thanking the Vale Foundation for its generous support of winter relief. Rowan looked at the torn sack, the raw ring around the dog's neck, the old man trapped in a pit for trying to do the decent thing. Generous support. The phrase sat in his mind like a clean white tablecloth thrown over a body. Otis reached out and gripped Rowan's sleeve with surprising strength. "Listen to me," he said. "I know what folks think I am. I know old Otis with his cup and his stories and his bad jokes, but I saw what I saw. I believe you." The answer came before Rowan could protect himself from it. Otis blinked. For a moment, the old man's face almost broke. Then he looked away, pretending to cough. Rowan secured the rope harness around Otis first. The climb was slow, ugly, full of curses from Otis, and one dry comment about how Rowan had the bedside manner of a tax audit. Rowan hauled him up to the rim, then climbed down again for the dog. Morrow watched him return. That somehow felt heavier than the rescue itself. "You're next," Rowan said. The shepherd's ears shifted. His right ear stood, but the left had a small tear along the edge, giving him a lopsided, battle-worn dignity. When Rowan slid the blanket beneath him, Morrow stiffened but did not fight. A lesser dog might have panicked from pain. Morrow only endured it, and endurance was sometimes the saddest form of courage. By the time Rowan got him to the top, snow had thickened. The world had gone pale and soft around the edges. Otis sat against the birch, wrapped in Rowan's spare coat, teeth chattering. Morrow lay between them and the access road, not behind Rowan, not curled in on himself between. His body shook with cold and pain, but his head remained lifted, eyes fixed toward the tire tracks disappearing into the trees. Rowan stared at him. A dog that had been beaten, tied, stuffed in a sack, and thrown into a freezing pit was still trying to guard two men he barely knew. Something inside Rowan, some locked room he had kept dark for years, shifted on its hinges. Otis noticed too. His voice went soft. "He ain't just scared," the old man said. "He's warning us." Rowan crouched beside Morrow. The dog's breath steamed in the cold. Blood had spotted the blanket beneath his shoulder. His collar plate caught the dimming light, the laurel branch flashing once like a small buried ember. Otis reached for Rowan's hand. His fingers were thin, cold, and trembling. "Take him," he said. "Please, I can't keep him. Hell, I can barely keep myself. But that dog knows things. Not words, maybe, but he knows people." He looked at those men like they'd broken a promise. Rowan looked toward the road home. His cabin waited beyond the pines, quiet and locked. One chair by the stove, one mug by the sink, one bed, one set of footprints, one man's ghosts kept orderly and private. He had built that silence carefully, brick by brick, loss by loss. Morrow tried to stand. His injured leg buckled. Pain rippled through him, but he forced himself upright anyway, placing his body once more between Rowan and the road where the black SUVs had vanished. Rowan let out a slow breath. "No," he said quietly, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to the dog, to Otis, or to the old cowardice in himself that called loneliness peace. "Not like this." He lifted Morrow into his arms. The shepherd was heavier than he looked, all bone, muscle, wet fur, and stubborn life. For 1 second, Morrow's head rested against Rowan's chest. The dog did not relax, but he did not pull away either. Otis gave a weak smile from the snow. "Looks like you got yourself a roommate, Mercer." Rowan carried the wounded dog toward the truck. Behind them, the clay pit darkened under the falling snow, already trying to hide what had happened there. Ahead, Brightwater Hollow glowed in the valley, warm and golden, beautiful as a lie told by candlelight. Rowan placed Morrow carefully on the passenger side floor, wrapped him in the blanket, then helped Otis into the back seat. Before closing the door, he looked once more at the old access road. The tire tracks were fading fast, but not gone. Not yet. Rowan shut the truck door. "All right," he said, starting the engine. "Let's get you both warm." As the truck climbed back toward the main road, Morrow lifted his head despite the pain and stared through the windshield toward town. Rowan followed his gaze, beneath the snow-bright roofs and glowing windows of Brightwater Hollow. Something had been buried, and tonight, for reasons Rowan did not yet understand, it had started breathing. The clinic smelled of cedar shavings, antiseptic old coffee, and animals who had decided humans were only useful when they carried food. Rowan brought Morrow through the back entrance because the front steps were slick with snow, and because the dog had already endured enough doors opening onto strangers. Otis had been dropped at the little urgent care beside the pharmacy, complaining loudly enough about government blankets that Rowan knew the old man would survive the night out of pure spite. Morrow was another matter. The German shepherd lay wrapped in Rowan's wool blanket, his head lifted just enough to watch everything. Pain had narrowed his body but not his attention. Even half. Frozen, even with blood darkening the fur near his shoulder. He tracked the corners of the room, the metal exam table, the cabinets, the hallway, Rowan's hands. Dr. Nadine Keller came out from the surgery room with a roll of gauze in one hand and a look that could make a raccoon confess. She was 48, solidly built, with dark hair tied low behind her neck and a permanent crease between her brows, as if the world kept failing basic husbandry. Her scrub top was sage green, her cardigan cream, colored and pilling at the cuffs. A silver stethoscope hung around her neck, the tubing wrapped in blue cloth tape where it had cracked years ago. "What did you bring me, Mercer?" she asked. "Dog in a sack." Nadine looked at him. Rowan added, "That was not my choice of packaging." Put him on the mat, not the table. If he panics, I don't want him falling. Morrow did not panic. That was the first thing Nadine noticed. Most wounded dogs filled the room with fear. They snapped, whined, curled inward, or tried to become invisible. Morrow did none of those things. Rowan eased him onto the thick rubber mat near the heater, and the shepherd braced himself through the pain with a discipline that was almost worse than crying. Nadine crouched slowly, letting the dog smell the back of her hand. "Hello, handsome," she said, her voice changing without becoming sweet. "You look like you argued with a snowplow and lost." Morrow's nostrils moved. He did not lick her. He did not bare his teeth. "Polite," Nadine murmured. "Suspicious, but polite. Better than most men in this town." Rowan stood near the wall, arms folded, eyes on the windows. Nadine glanced up. "You planning to help, or are you guarding my diplomas?" "Both," comforting. She cut away the stained blanket and began examining Morrow. Her face changed by degrees. The dry humor faded first. Then the crease between her brows deepened. When she touched the wound near his shoulder, Morrow's body tightened, but he made no sound. "This didn't come from falling into a clay pit," she said. Rowan said nothing. Nadine parted the fur at Morrow's neck. "This is a pressure mark. Something was tight around him for a while, not a leash tug restraint." She checked the paws next, turning each one with careful hands. Claws scraped down. He tried to dig or claw his way out of somewhere. Maybe a crate, maybe a kennel door. Morrow suddenly flinched when someone in the hallway shut a metal cabinet. Not a big movement, just a hard ripple through the muscles. Ears flattening, breath catching. Rowan saw it. Nadine saw Rowan seeing it. The cabinet noise faded. Morrow did not relax for several seconds. Nadine's voice grew quieter. "Someone kept him confined." Rowan's jaw shifted once. "Can you treat him?" "I can clean the wound, start antibiotics, manage the pain, and X-ray the leg. Whether he trusts me enough to do it without turning my hand into confetti is the question." Rowan stepped closer, then stopped. He did not want to crowd the dog. He knew the look of an animal deciding whether survival required violence. Without thinking, he raised his right hand slightly, palm low, fingers together. The old silent signal for down and hold. Morrow obeyed. Not slowly. Not because the pain forced him there. He lowered himself with the clean precision of training. Nadine looked from the dog to Rowan. "Well?" she said after a moment. "That answers a question I hadn't asked yet." Rowan dropped his hand as if it had betrayed him. "I didn't mean to, but he knew what you meant." Morrow rested his chin on the mat, eyes still open, still watching. Nadine prepared the sedative but used the smallest dose she could. "This dog has had formal handling. Not basic obedience. Not rich, person trophy training. Real work." He stopped on a hand signal. "I noticed. You know any local program that trained dogs like that?" Nadine did not answer until she had cleaned the shoulder wound. She worked with steady hands, muttering insults at the people who had caused it. None of them imaginative, but all of them sincere. Morrow endured the wash, the clipping, the sting of antiseptic. Once, when the pain broke through, his head turned toward Rowan, not asking, not pleading, just checking whether the man was still there. Rowan moved closer. He placed 2 fingers lightly on the mat where Morrow could see them. The shepherd's eyes settled on his hand. Something passed between them then, small enough that Nadine almost missed it. Rowan did not pet him. Morrow did not lean in. But the dog's breathing eased by 1 careful inch. For Rowan, that inch felt dangerous. Trust was easy when it belonged to someone else. In his own life, it had always arrived carrying a bill. Nadine finished dressing the wound and stood. "His shoulder will heal if infection doesn't set in. Leg sprained, maybe strained. No fracture from what I can feel, but I want imaging in the morning. He's underweight, dehydrated, exhausted." She stripped off her gloves. "And very lucky you found him. Otis found him." Otis falls into things. You drag him out. It's a local ecosystem. Rowan almost smiled. Nadine took a handheld scanner from a drawer. Let's see if our mysterious gentleman has a chip. The scanner passed over Morrow's neck once. Nothing. She frowned and tried the shoulder. A beep sounded. Morrow's ear twitched. Nadine read the number on the screen, then typed it into the clinic computer. The old machine hummed with the enthusiasm of a dying tractor. Snow tapped the windows in soft little clicks. The file opened. Nadine's expression went still. "What?" Rowan asked. She leaned closer. Registered name Morrow. Male German Shepherd. Age 6 years. 4 months. Program classification. She stopped. Rowan stepped beside her. Nadine read the line aloud. Therapy and Winter Support Canine. Vale Winter House. The room seemed to lose a degree of warmth. Outside, the town glowed beyond the frosted glass. Vale Winter House was a name people spoke with the easy reverence reserved for church roofs and fire departments. Its foundation paid for coats, heaters, emergency shelter beds, Christmas lights, public gratitude. Nadine scrolled down. Primary program founder listed as Evelyn Vale, she said. Not Whitaker Evelyn. Rowan knew the name the way everyone in Brightwater Hollow knew it. Evelyn Vale had been dead 3 years, but people still lowered their voices when they talked about her, as if kindness deserved the same respect as prayer. Nadine clicked another tab. That's strange. Strange how? Status updated 8 months ago. Transferred out of active program. She clicked again. Then updated 6 weeks ago. No longer active program discontinued. Her mouth tightened. But there's no receiving facility listed, no adoption record, no euthanasia record, no death certificate, nothing. Can someone edit that? With access, yes. With permission, yes, properly. It should leave a trail. Nadine looked at him. This looks like someone wanted him to stop existing on paper before he stopped existing in the world. Morrow lifted his head at the sound of her voice, as if he knew the shape of bad news even when the words were not meant for him. Nadine printed the record before the system could change its mind. The printer groaned and spat out 3 pages. She handed them to Rowan. Take copies, keep them dry. And Mercer? He looked at her. Don't hand him back to anyone from Vale without a court order and a deputy watching. That bad, that quiet. Rowan folded the pages and placed them inside his jacket. By the time he left the clinic, Morrow had been bandaged, hydrated, medicated, and wrapped in a clean thermal blanket that had ducks printed on it. Nadine claimed it was the only one available. Rowan suspected revenge for dripping blood on her floor. The sheriff's office sat 2 blocks from the clinic. A brick building with a flag stiff in the cold, and a porch light that buzzed like an insect too stubborn to die. Rowan parked close, left the heater running for Morrow, and went inside with the printed microchip record tucked under his arm. Sheriff Tessa Croft was standing over a desk full of weather reports, road closure maps, and 1 mug of coffee she had clearly abandoned. After losing faith in it, she looked up as Rowan entered. Tessa was 46, tall and lean, with dark blonde hair pulled back at the nape of her neck and a small scar beneath her chin. Her uniform was neat without being stiff, her Navy sheriff's jacket hanging open over a tan shirt. She had the manner of someone who listened before deciding whether to believe you, which made some people nervous and others honest. Rowan, she said, if this is about Gloria accusing you of biscuit theft, I'm busy. The biscuit was thrown at me. Then it's evidence. He set Nadine's printouts on her desk. Otis Bell fell into the old clay pit. He was trying to rescue a dog someone threw down there in a sack. Tessa's face changed. Not dramatically. Tessa did not waste expression, but her hand moved from the coffee mug to the papers. Otis hurt, cold, bruised, loud. So alive. Yes, she read the first page. Then the second. By the third, her eyes had narrowed. Vale Winter House, she said. Rowan waited. Tessa looked toward the window, where holiday lights stretched across Main Street in gold loops. "Tell me exactly what Otis saw." Rowan did. He did not decorate it. He did not soften the part about the SUVs. He did not hide his own lack of proof. Tessa listened, writing in a small dark blue notebook she pulled from her chest pocket. Once or twice she asked a question that told Rowan she had already begun building the skeleton of a case. When he finished, she sat back. "I can take Otis's statement," she said. "I can request any traffic camera footage from the main road. I can ask Nadine for a veterinary report. But I cannot search Vale property because a frightened man saw dark vehicles near an abandoned pit." "He wasn't frightened when he went down after the dog." Tessa's eyes lifted. "I know." The answer was gentle, which somehow made it worse. Rowan leaned forward. "They tried to kill that dog. Maybe." "Not maybe." "I am not arguing with you, Rowan. I'm telling you what will survive a judge and what Whitaker Vale's lawyers will eat before breakfast." Tessa tapped the printed page. "The foundation funds half the warming station repairs. They bought this department its backup generator. 2 town council members sit on their advisory board. If I move too early and miss, they'll call it harassment. Because Vale gives money. Because Vale gives money to people who freeze without it." That landed harder than Rowan wanted it to. Tessa's voice dropped. 3 years ago, after Evelyn died, I tried to check on Winter House. Heard rumors. Beds closed. People turned away. Dogs transferred. I went in with questions and came out with nothing I could prove. The council said I was creating panic during a hard winter. She looked at the papers again. "I won't make that mistake twice. If I go at them, I go with teeth." Rowan understood tactics. He hated understanding them here. Truth, he realized, had different weapons in small towns. No rifles, no night vision. Just paperwork, reputation, heating bills, and the quiet terror of losing what little kept people alive. He stood. "Tessa said, keep the dog safe. Keep Otis reachable. And if anyone from Vale contacts you, tell me." Rowan opened the door, then paused. "You believe me?" Tessa's answer came after one breath. "I believe something happened. I believe Vale knows more than they'll say. And I believe you're the kind of man who would rather be wrong alone than quiet with company." It was not comfort, but it was something close to respect. Rowan drove home under a sky turning purple at the edges. Morrow lay on the passenger side floor, awake despite the medication, nose pointed toward the heater vent. The duck blanket rose and fell with his breathing. Once, when the truck passed the road to the clay pit, the shepherd lifted his head and stared until the trees hid it. Rowan did not speak. His cabin came into view through the pines, a low square of lamplight in the snow. Usually seeing it eased something in him. Tonight it looked smaller. Not lonely exactly, but unprepared. He carried Morrow inside. The dog woke fully the moment they crossed the threshold. Rowan expected him to sniff, stagger, maybe collapse near the stove. Morrow did none of those things. He moved through the cabin with slow, painful purpose. Front door, window, kitchen, back door, hallway, bedroom, threshold. He paused at each point, head turning, ears measuring the house. A wounded animal should have looked for a corner. Morrow looked for vulnerabilities. Rowan stood by the stove, watching a dog in a duck blanket conduct a security sweep of a one-man cabin. "You know," he said, "I was doing fine before I had a house inspector." Morrow glanced at him once, unimpressed, then lowered himself near the front door where he could see both the window and the hall. Rowan filled a bowl with water and set it within reach. Morrow watched the bowl, then Rowan. Then the bowl again. "Not poisoned," Rowan said. The dog did not move. Rowan sat on the floor a few feet away, his back against the cabinet, knees bent. He was not a man who sat on floors often. The position made his left shoulder complain, and his pride file a formal protest. He dipped 2 fingers into the water, touched them to his own mouth, then slid the bowl slightly closer. Morrow waited. At last, the shepherd lowered his head and drank. Not much. Enough. Rowan felt a ridiculous amount of victory over 2 inches of water disappearing from a chipped blue bowl. The fire cracked in the stove. Wind pressed snow against the windows. Somewhere in the walls, the old cabin settled with a wooden sigh. Rowan took the folded clinic papers from his jacket and set them on the table. Vale Winter House. Evelyn Vale transferred. No longer active. Paperwork trying to bury a living thing. He thought of Otis in the pit. Nadine's anger hidden beneath professionalism. Tessa's careful face when she said money kept people from freezing. He thought of Brightwater Hollow glowing warm under strings of holiday lights, and for the first time in years, he wondered how many shadows a town could cast while still calling itself bright. Morrow shifted. A small sound escaped him. Not a whine, exactly. Rowan turned. The dog was asleep, but not peacefully. His paws twitched. His breath grew uneven. His body folded tighter, as if a metal door had shut somewhere in his dream. Rowan knew better than to grab him. He also knew better than to do nothing. Quietly, he made the same low hand signal he had used at the clinic, though Morrow's eyes were closed. "Easy," he said. "You're not there." The shepherd's ears moved. His breathing slowed. Rowan swallowed. He stayed on the floor. Minutes passed. Then more. At some point, Morrow opened one amber eye and looked at him. Rowan gave a tired half-smile. "I'm not good at trust either, old man." Morrow exhaled through his nose, long and weary, as if deeply disappointed by the obviousness of human problems. For the first time that night, Rowan laughed softly. Not much enough. He reached up to the table and pulled his old steel coin from beside the clinic papers. The words scratched into it, "Hold fast," were nearly worn smooth from years beneath his thumb. He turned it once, then set it beside Morrow's collar record. A small thing? A promise, maybe. Outside, snow kept falling over the road. The trees, the rooftops, the places where good people slept, and the places where forgotten people tried to. Inside the cabin, a man who had built his life around silence sat watch beside a wounded dog who did not yet know if kindness could be trusted past midnight. Neither of them slept easily, but neither of them was alone. By morning, Brightwater Hollow looked innocent again. Snow had polished the roofs clean. The church bell tower wore a white cap. Main Street shone beneath strings of gold lights stretched from lamppost to lamppost, the kind of cheerful winter brightness that made tourists slow down and take pictures from warm cars. Rowan drove through it with Morrow lying across the back seat on a folded quilt. The dog had slept in broken pieces through the night. So had Rowan. Once, near 3 in the morning, Morrow had startled awake when the old furnace clicked too loudly. Rowan had not touched him. He had only sat up on the couch and said, "Still here." That had been enough. Now Morrow watched the town through the truck window, his bandaged shoulder wrapped beneath a clean harness Rowan had improvised from an old field strap. The German shepherd did not whine. He did not press his nose to the glass. He simply watched, absorbing every storefront, every sidewalk, every person who turned to stare. Rowan knew that kind of watching. It belonged to those who had learned that danger often wore ordinary shoes. He turned off Main Street and climbed the road toward the Vale estate. The higher he drove, the more the town seemed to arrange itself beneath him, like a Christmas village placed in a display window. The lake glittered beyond the rooftops. Smoke rose from chimneys in soft columns. At the top of the hill, behind a stone wall capped with fresh snow, stood the Vale house. It was beautiful in a way that did not invite muddy boots. White stone, tall windows, black shutters, pine trees wrapped in golden lights. A long driveway swept so clean it looked as if winter itself had been asked to wait at the gate. 2 bronze lanterns burned on either side of the front steps, though the morning was bright enough not to need them. Rowan parked near the circular drive and sat for a moment. Morrow had gone still. not frightened in the way most animals showed fear. No whining, no clawing at the door. He simply lowered his head, eyes fixed on the house, his breathing shallow beneath the bandage. Rowan looked at him in the mirror. "You know this place?" Morrow did not look away from the windows. Rowan got out. He left the truck running for warmth, but opened the rear door so Morrow could see him. "Stay." The dog's amber eyes flicked to him. He obeyed. The front door opened before Rowan knocked. A man in a dark suit looked him over with polite suspicion. Behind him, the foyer gleamed with marble tile, polished wood, and an enormous arrangement of white roses that looked too perfect to have ever touched soil. "Mr. Mercer," the man said, "Mr. Vale is expecting you." Rowan did not ask how. He stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him, scented faintly with pine, wax, and expensive soap. The house was silent, except for the soft tick of a long-case clock. On one wall hung framed photographs of ribbon cuttings, charity banquets, winter relief drives, smiling donors, smiling officials, smiling Whitaker Vale, standing always in the center, one hand resting lightly on someone else's gratitude. Whitaker Vale entered from a side room as though he had been timed by a stage manager. He was 63, tall and slender, with thick silver hair combed back so perfectly it seemed immune to weather. His cashmere coat was gray, his scarf ivory, his gloves black leather. He smiled warmly, but his pale blue eyes remained cool, measuring Rowan from boots to brow scar and back again. "Mr. Mercer," he said, extending a hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Rowan shook it. Whitaker's hand was soft, dry, and strong in a practiced way. "You know why I'm here," Rowan said. Whitaker's expression folded into sorrow with impressive speed. "Morrow." The name changed something outside. Through the tall window beside the door, Rowan saw the shepherd lift his head in the truck. Whitaker noticed Rowan noticing. "I was told someone found him near the old clay works," Whitaker said. "A terrible thing, truly terrible. He was in a sack." A faint pause. "Yes, I heard." Whitaker lowered his gaze as if personally wounded by the ugliness of the world. "I cannot imagine who would do such a thing. Can't you?" The suit near the doorway shifted. Whitaker raised one hand, and the man stilled. "I understand your anger," Whitaker said. "Morrow was part of my late wife's program. Evelyn had a generous heart, sometimes too generous. She believed broken creatures could be loved back into usefulness." His smile dimmed. "I admired that about her, even when I feared it would hurt her." Rowan said nothing. Whitaker walked toward the window. From there, he could see Morrow in the truck. The dog did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply shrank back half an inch, head lowering, eyes turning away. That reaction told Rowan more than a growl would have. Whitaker's voice softened. "After Evelyn passed, Morrow became unstable. Grief affects animals too. He bit a staff member. He refused handling. We tried to place him with specialists, but there are liabilities. You understand responsibility, Mr. Mercer? A dangerous animal cannot be allowed to become a public hazard. He didn't bite Nadine Keller. Dr. Keller is excellent with animals. He didn't bite Otis Bell." Whitaker's mouth tightened at the name, then released. "Mr. Bell has a complicated relationship with accuracy." Rowan stepped closer. The room seemed to notice. Otis climbed into a frozen pit to save a dog someone else threw away. His accuracy was good enough for that. Whitaker turned from the window. For the first time, something under the velvet of his manners showed a hard seam. "I am offering to cover all veterinary costs," he said. "I will also arrange for Morrow to be taken to a proper facility. Quietly, humanely. There is no need for this to become a spectacle." A proper facility. Yes. Like the sack. The silence after that was very clean. Whitaker's smile did not disappear. It became smaller, sharper. "You are a respected man in this town, Mr. Mercer. People admire your service, your helpfulness, your restraint." He let the last word rest between them. "I would hate to see that reputation burdened by an emotional attachment to an animal with a troubled history." Rowan looked at the photographs on the wall. Winter relief, community warmth, Vale Foundation. A whole corridor of kindness trapped behind glass. "Funny thing about history," Rowan said. "People who control the frame usually think they own the picture." Whitaker's eyes cooled another degree. "Keep me informed about Morrow's condition," he said. "And please remember, he belongs to the foundation." Rowan opened the front door. "No," he said. "He belongs to himself." Outside, the cold felt honest. Morrow was standing when Rowan reached the truck, though his bad leg trembled. His gaze stayed on the house until Rowan shut the door between them and the estate. Only then did the dog breathe. Rowan drove down the hill without turning on the radio. Halfway into town, he pulled over by the frozen lake and sat with both hands on the wheel. He was angry, but anger was easy. Anger had clean edges. What unsettled him was Morrow's silence in that house. The way the dog had not challenged Whitaker, only folded inward. Rowan had seen men do that, not cowards, survivors. Men who had learned that certain rooms punished defiance before it became sound. In the back seat, Morrow shifted, and the metal plate on his collar clicked once against the harness buckle. A small sound, a small reminder. Rowan looked into the mirror. "All right, we ask people who remember her." The Maple Lantern Diner was warm enough to fog the windows and loud enough to make sorrow feel underdressed. The bell above the door jingled as Rowan walked in. 3 men at the counter glanced at him. A woman in a red coat gave him a small wave. Someone near the back said, "Generator's still running, Mercer, miracle or witchcraft." "Threats," Rowan replied. A few people laughed. Gloria Madsen emerged from the kitchen carrying a coffee pot like a queen carrying a scepter. She was 62, round-faced, strong-armed, and permanently scented of cinnamon, grease, and justice. Her short silver blonde hair was tucked behind one ear. Over her flannel shirt, she wore a denim apron embroidered with maple lantern in yellow thread. She took one look at Rowan's face and set the coffee pot down. "Oh, good," she said. "You've got that look. Either you found trouble, or trouble got tired of waiting and came to you." "I need to ask about Evelyn Vale." The diner softened by a few decibels, not silent. Brightwater Hollow was too polite to be obvious, but conversations changed direction. Forks slowed, a chair creaked. Gloria's eyes moved toward the windows, then back to Rowan. "Sit." He did. She poured coffee without asking and set a bowl of stew in front of him. "I didn't order. You never do. That's why civilization invented women with ladles." Rowan picked up the spoon because arguing with Gloria wasted more energy than surrender. She sat across from him, wiping her hands on her apron. Evelyn Vale was the reason that house on the hill ever had a soul. Whitaker had money. Evelyn had hands. Hands. She used them. Gloria's voice gentled. Cooked, bandaged, hauled blankets, scrubbed floors when no one else showed. She opened Winter House during the bad blizzard 12 years ago. Took in truckers, veterans, folks sleeping in cars, 2 stray dogs, and 1 man who claimed he was allergic to charity but not to meatloaf. Otis. Of course, Otis. Gloria smiled. He ate 3 plates and insulted the potatoes. Rowan glanced toward the truck outside. Morrow lay low in the back seat, watching the diner door. "What about Morrow?" Gloria's face changed. That dog was Evelyn's shadow. Not a pet, exactly. Not just a working dog, either. She used to say Morrow could hear a heart cracking before the person did. Veterans loved him. People who wouldn't talk to pastors, doctors, or their own wives would sit with that dog and breathe again. Whitaker says he got dangerous after Evelyn died. Gloria's mouth twisted. Whitaker says whatever makes Whitaker sound burdened by other people's failures. What happened to Winter House? She looked down at her hands. After Evelyn died, the soup nights became donor dinners. The beds became temporary seasonal units. Then the units closed for renovations that never seemed to end. People were told to go to county services 40 miles away. Dogs got transferred. Staff left. Whitaker started talking about sustainable development and lakeside revitalization. She snorted. Anytime a rich man uses enough pretty words, check who's being moved out of the picture. Rowan let that settle. Gloria leaned closer. You be careful with him? Whitaker. The men who stand behind him. Before Rowan could answer, the diner door opened and cold air swept in. A small woman in a moss-green wool coat stepped inside, shaking snow from a burgundy knit beret. She carried a canvas library bag stuffed with folders, newspapers, and what looked like half the municipal archive. Her round glasses fogged immediately. Gloria called out, "Lydia, you're dripping on my floor again." "Then your floor has been blessed by literacy," the woman said. Gloria pointed at Rowan. "He's asking about Evelyn." Lydia Crane stopped removing her gloves. Her gaze sharpened behind the fogged lenses. "The living have finally begun asking useful questions," she said. "How inconvenient for the dead." That was Rowan's introduction to Brightwater Hollow's librarian. Lydia led him to the library after Gloria packed him 2 slices of pie. "For the dog, if the dog has better sense than you." Morrow stayed in the truck, heater running, eyes following Rowan through the glass until the library door closed. Inside, the building smelled of paper, dust, and radiators working hard for modest pay. Lydia moved through the stacks with quick little steps, pulling boxes from shelves, muttering dates under her breath. She was not dramatic. She was worse. She was precise. "People think memory is sentimental," she said, sliding a box onto a reading table. "It is not. Memory is evidence with a pulse." She opened a folder. Photographs spilled out. Evelyn Vale stood in one of them before Winter House, laughing in a heavy red coat, snow caught in her dark hair. Beside her sat Morrow, younger, fuller, his coat glossy black and gold. Around them stood a half-dozen older men in winter hats and mismatched gloves. One had tears on his cheeks. Another rested his hand on Morrow's head as if anchoring himself to the world. Rowan touched the edge of the picture. Not the woman, not the men, the dog. The same eyes, less guarded, but unmistakably the same. "She called him the doorkeeper," Lydia said. "Doorkeeper? Of tired souls." Her phrase, "Not mine," a little grand, but Evelyn earned some grandeur. Lydia pulled another clipping. Winter House began as emergency shelter, then therapy support, then canine retirement partnerships. Evelyn had a talent for gathering creatures the world had misplaced. Rowan studied the photo in it. Morrow looked proud, not obedient in the stiff way of dogs made into tools, but proud in the way of someone useful and loved. A strange ache moved through Rowan. He had seen the dog in a sack. Now he saw him in sunlight. The distance between those 2 images was the shape of a crime. Lydia placed a final photograph in front of him. Evelyn stood beside Whitaker at a ribbon cutting. Whitaker smiled for the camera. Evelyn looked slightly away toward a man sitting on the steps with Morrow's head in his lap. "After she died, I tried to preserve the Winter House records," Lydia said. "Some vanished, donation ledgers, animal placement files, guest logs. Whitaker's office called it reorganizing. Can you prove that?" "Not yet." Lydia adjusted her glasses, but lost things have habits. They leave gaps shaped exactly like themselves. Rowan looked up for the first time that day. He felt the faintest outline of a path. Not a battlefield, a trail through snow. He returned home near sunset and set. The cabin looked different with Morrow inside it, as if the place had been caught pretending it needed no one. Rowan fed the dog a small portion of boiled chicken Nadine had approved, changed the water, checked the bandage, and was trying to determine whether pie counted as veterinary medicine when headlights swept across the front window. Morrow rose before Rowan heard the engine stop. No bark, no growl, just that terrible stillness. A black SUV sat in the driveway. The man who stepped out was tall and broad with a shaved head, a thick neck, and a black tactical coat that fit him like a locked door. He moved through the snow with the flat confidence of someone who had never once wondered whether he was welcome. Rowan opened the cabin door before the man knocked. The visitor smiled without warmth. "Mr. Mercer," Dorian piped. "Vale Security." Morrow stood behind Rowan, half in shadow, injured leg trembling. Dorian's eyes flicked to the dog. Something like annoyance crossed his face and vanished. "Mr. Vale would prefer this matter be resolved quietly," Dorian said. "You're in possession of Foundation property?" Rowan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Funny, he looks like a dog. A valuable trained animal with a documented history of instability? Documented by who? People with more authority than you? That list gets shorter every winter." Dorian's smile tightened. He wore black gloves, and he adjusted the right one finger by finger before speaking again. Morrow made the smallest sound, not a growl, a breath caught behind teeth. Rowan noticed the dog staring at the gloves. Dorian did too. "See?" Dorian said softly. "Reactive, unpredictable, dangerous." Rowan stepped fully into the doorway, blocking Morrow from view. "You drove out here in the dark to diagnose my dog. I drove out here to advise you. Brightwater Hollow likes you, Mercer. Handyman, war hero, quiet neighbor." Dorian's eyes flattened. "But liking a man doesn't mean choosing him over heat, road salt emergency grants, or the foundation that keeps this town alive." Rowan said nothing. Dorian looked past him toward the cabin, toward the warm lamplight and the dog inside. "Give him back before this turns into something people regret." "People already regret it," Rowan said. "They just haven't admitted which part yet." For a moment, Dorian's mask thinned. Then he stepped back. "Evening." He returned to the SUV and drove away slowly, tires pressing black tracks into the snow. Rowan closed the door. Morrow stood at the window, body rigid, eyes following the red taillights down the road until the trees swallowed them. Only then did the shepherd lower his head. Rowan crouched beside him. "You knew him." Morrow did not move. Outside, the last daylight faded. In town, the Christmas lights would be coming on, paid for by the man on the hill. The warming station would hum because of a generator bought with foundation money. Families would eat under roofs that had survived winter thanks to grants signed by Whitaker Vale. Rowan understood then that Whitaker had not merely bought influence. He had bought the town's excuses in advance. Morrow remained at the window, silent as a witness no court had yet agreed to hear. Rowan rested one hand on the sill beside him, not touching, just staying close. "All right," he said. "We won't ask them to choose yet." The dog's ear shifted toward him. Rowan looked out at the fading tracks. "We'll make sure they know what they're choosing." Rowan had spent enough years in uniform to know when a mission was too large for one man. He disliked that truth. He disliked it the way a man dislikes a bad knee before a storm. Not because it was false, but because it kept being right. By sunrise, his kitchen table had become a poor man's command center. Nadine's veterinary report lay beside the microchip printout. Lydia's copied photographs were stacked under Rowan's old steel coin to keep them from curling. A map of Brightwater Hollow sat open beneath a coffee mug, marked with pencil circles around the Vale estate, the old clay pit, the abandoned way station, and the road where Otis had heard the black SUVs. Morrow lay near the front door, bandaged shoulder rising and falling. He had refused the soft blanket Rowan had placed near the stove and chosen instead the coldest strategic position in the cabin. A soldier's bed, Rowan thought, uncomfortable, useful, and close to trouble. "You know," Rowan said, looking down at him, "there are warmer ways to be stubborn." Morrow opened one amber eye. It was not admiration. Rowan took it as progress. By 8, Nadine called from the clinic. Her voice sounded sharper than usual, which meant she had either found something useful or had been forced to speak with someone incompetent. "I finished the written report," she said. "Shoulder trauma, restraint marks, claw damage, dehydration, underweight. I used every boring medical term I know. Lawyers hate poetry, but fear documentation." You have copies? 3. One in the clinic, one locked in my truck, one hidden in a bag of ferret food no sensible human will touch. That's thorough. That's experience. Lydia called next. She had already opened the library early and sounded as if she were standing beneath a collapsing mountain of paper with no desire to be rescued. Winter House guest logs after Evelyn's death are missing from the public archive, she said. But the town newsletters still mention events they forgot to scrub: soup nights, veteran rest stays, canine therapy circles, Evelyn's name everywhere, Whitaker's name mostly on checks and ribbon cuttings. Can you prove records were removed? Not yet, but absence has handwriting if you stare long enough. Gloria joined in the only way Gloria knew how, by feeding information through the town's bloodstream. She asked regulars at Maple Lantern about Winter House, without making it sound like an interrogation. She served coffee, refilled mugs, listened to people who did not yet know they were witnesses. By mid-morning, Rowan drove to the sheriff's office with Morrow in the back seat. Sheriff Tessa Croft stood over a desk covered in road maps and weather alerts. Beside her was a younger man in a deputy's jacket, tall and narrow through the shoulders, with tired eyes and the uneasy posture of someone trying to balance duty against the town's heating bill. "This is Deputy Jonah Reed," Tessa said. "He's checking cameras around the old way station." Jonah gave Rowan a look that was not hostile exactly, more like a locked door with a polite sign. "I know what people are saying," Jonah said. "But if this turns into a fight with Vale and we come up empty, the town pays for it." Rowan nodded. "Then don't come up empty." Tessa's mouth twitched. Jonah did not smile. "There's an old trail camera on the ridge above the clay road," Jonah said. "Belongs to Walt Granger. He mostly catches deer in his neighbor dumping yard waste. I'm pulling the card now." "Good," Rowan said. Jonah looked toward the truck window where Morrow watched from behind fog glass. "That the dog?" "Morrow." Jonah's expression shifted despite himself. "Looks rough." "Still standing." "Sometimes that's all the report says," Tessa murmured. By noon, the first piece of outside proof appeared. The trail camera image was grainy, greenish, half-blinded by blowing snow. It did not show faces. It did not show the sack. But it showed two black SUVs turning down the old access road at 6:43 p.m., the night Otis fell into the pit. One vehicle carried a small emblem near the door, too blurred to read, but not blurred enough to ignore. Jonah stared at the screen longer than necessary. "That road's closed," he said quietly. Tessa crossed her arms. "Yes? No reason for private security to be down there." "No." Jonah exhaled through his nose, as if surrendering a position he had not enjoyed defending. "I'll see if the main road camera caught plates." Rowan watched the deputy leave the room. Tessa said, "He's not against you." Didn't say he was. "He's scared of what happens if the town loses Vale money. His mother uses the warming station when the power goes out." Rowan looked at the image frozen on the screen. Dark vehicles, white storm, a road meant for forgotten things. "Fear is useful," he said, "until somebody starts selling it back to you." Tessa glanced at him, but he was already looking toward the truck. Morrow had lowered his head against the seat. Not asleep. Listening. The next clue came from Otis. So Rowan found him at the urgent care clinic, wrapped in a blanket and drinking vending machine coffee with the tragic dignity of a poisoned king. "This tastes like a boot remembered being coffee," Otis said. "You look better." "I have survived worse insults than falling into a hole." The nurse had told Rowan that Otis's hip was bruised, nothing broken, though pride remained in critical condition. Rowan sat beside the bed and waited. With Otis, silence usually worked better than questions. The old man rubbed his thumb along the rim of his dented tin cup. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Otis said at last. "Lavender?" Rowan looked at him. "Evelyn grew it," Otis continued. "Not out front where rich folks could admire it. In the greenhouse behind the house. Winter lavender. Said it was fussy, stubborn, and worth the trouble. Like most living things." His eyes grew distant. "Guess she used to rub dried lavender on Morrow's little blanket. Calmed him after sessions with men who shook too hard to sleep." Rowan remembered Morrow's reaction to certain smells around the cabin, his nose lifting when Rowan opened an old drawer where cedar and dried herbs had been stored by the previous owner. Greenhouse still there? Should be, unless Whitaker paved it into a place for donors to park their guilt. Otis's mouth bent in a tired smile. Then he reached out and grabbed Rowan's sleeve. "Don't go alone." It was not a plea. It was a command from a man who had already fallen once, trying to do the right thing. Rowan covered Otis's hand briefly with his own. "I won't." The old greenhouse sat behind the Vale estate, half hidden beyond a row of snow-heavy hedges and a service path that had not been shoveled properly in years. Rowan did not bring a weapon beyond the knife in his boot and the common sense not to call it bravery. Lydia came because she knew the old volunteer entrance. Nadine came because if anyone questioned them, she could claim she was checking the welfare history of a registered therapy animal, and she was frighteningly good at sounding official when annoyed. Morrow came because when Rowan opened the truck door, the dog stood despite the pain and refused to lie back down. "You should be resting," Nadine told him. Morrow looked past her toward the greenhouse. Nadine sighed. "Fine, but if you rip a stitch, I'm billing your dramatic instincts." The morning was bright and cold, the sky a hard winter blue. Snow flashed on every surface. In another life, Rowan might have thought the Vale grounds beautiful. Today, beauty felt like a guard posted at the door of a secret. Lydia unlocked the volunteer gate with a key she insisted was not stolen, merely historically retained. They slipped through without crossing the main drive. The greenhouse door was stiff with ice. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been, but warmer than outside. Broken panes had been patched with plastic. Dead vines clung to old frames. Clay pots sat in rows beneath dust and frost. The place smelled of soil, rust, and something faintly herbal beneath the rot. Morrow stopped just inside. His whole body changed. Not fear, not exactly. Recognition. He lowered his nose to the floor and breathed in slowly. Then he moved forward, limping between dead planting tables with the focus of a pilgrim entering a ruined chapel. No one spoke. Even Nadine, who had opinions about everything from claw trimming to town council incompetence, stayed silent. Ew. Morrow stopped beside a long wooden workbench near the back. The boards were warped, the legs dark with old water stains. Beneath it, half hidden behind cracked pots, sat a shallow planting tray filled with dry soil. Morrow touched his nose to the tray. Then he looked at Rowan. It was the first time since the pit that the dog seemed to ask for something. Not rescue. Understanding. Rowan crouched and brushed aside the top layer of dry soil. His fingers struck cloth. He cleared more dirt, carefully now, until he uncovered an oil-wrapped bundle tucked into a tin box. Lydia inhaled. "Oh, Evelyn," she whispered. The box was not locked. Inside were photographs, folded papers, and a notebook with a green cloth cover faded at the edges. The first photograph showed Evelyn Vale sitting on the greenhouse floor in work pants and a wool sweater, laughing as a younger Morrow tried to steal a glove from her hand. Dirt streaked her cheek. No gala dress, no pearls, no polished stage. Just a woman, a dog, and a place where kindness had apparently been allowed to get mud on its boots. Rowan turned the photo over. In neat handwriting, Morrow, first winter. He trusts slowly. So do the best ones. The words hit him in a place he had not guarded. For a moment he saw his cabin floor, the blue water bowl, the dog refusing to drink, until Rowan tasted first. He saw himself in the shape of that caution and hated how familiar it looked. Lydia opened the notebook with reverence. Names filled the pages: veterans, widowers, women sleeping in cars, retired working dogs, dates of stays, notes written in Evelyn's hand. Earl M. wakes at 3:10 most nights. Morrow should sleep near the east cot. Otis Bell dislikes pity, accepts stew if insulted first. Chaha 9. Jasper cannot tolerate slammed metal doors. Morrow responds well to lavender after high-stress sessions. Nadine's eyes softened. She documented care like it mattered. It did matter, Lydia said, voice thin. Farther in, the handwriting changed. It became tighter, less fluid. Whitaker believes Winter House must become sustainable. He uses that word when he means profitable. If anything happens to me, Marin must be contacted about the independent board. Do not let him turn shelter into scenery. Rowan turned another page. Marin Holt, draft trust transfer, winter care charter, canine retirement clause. Lydia touched the name. Marin? You know her? Everyone knew Marin Holt when they needed something notarized, defended, or translated from legal English into human decency. Lydia closed the notebook gently. She retired after her husband died, lives 20 miles out, old farm road, doesn't answer calls she doesn't like. Will she answer yours? Lydia gave him a look. I'm a librarian. We don't call. Are we arrived with documents? Nadine was still staring at the page about slammed metal doors. Her face had gone hard in a different way now, not sharp, but wounded. He wasn't born afraid of that sound, she said. Morrow stood beside Rowan, eyes fixed on the photograph of Evelyn. Slowly, painfully, he lowered himself until his chest touched the greenhouse floor. For the first time, the dog looked old. Not in body, in memory. Rowan reached down and rested his hand near Morrow's paw. Not on it. Near it. The dog did not move away. That was when the greenhouse door opened. Cold air swept in, carrying the crunch of boots. Dorian Pike stood in the doorway with 2 security men behind him. He wore the same black tactical coat, the same black gloves. His shaved head caught the pale light. His gaze moved from Rowan to Lydia to Nadine, then settled on the tin box. Well, Dorian said. That looks like Foundation property. Lydia stood straighter. This greenhouse was historically open to Winter House volunteers. Not today. Nadine folded her arms. We're documenting animal welfare history tied to a registered therapy dog. Dorian's mouth twitched. That sentence sounded expensive. Still trespassing. Rowan closed the notebook and placed himself between Dorian and the box. Dorian looked pleased by that. You want to make this physical, Mercer? No. Shame. One of the security men had already called someone. Within 10 minutes, Tessa's cruiser rolled up outside the greenhouse, lights off. She entered with Deputy Jonah behind her, and the look on her face told Rowan everything before she spoke. Rowan, she said quietly, I need you to come with me. Dorian smiled. Tessa did not look at him. For a statement. Ha! Nothing more. He broke into Foundation property, Dorian said, and attempted to remove private documents. Lydia bristled. Those documents concern a public charity. Then lawyers can discuss that, Dorian replied. Rowan looked at Tessa. Her eyes carried apology, anger, and warning all at once. If she refused to act, Whitaker would paint her as corrupt. If Rowan resisted, Dorian would get exactly the story he wanted. Rowan handed the tin box to Lydia. Dorian stepped forward. That stays here. Tessa turned on him. No, it comes with me as potential evidence in a dispute involving animal welfare and charitable records.
You can have your attorney call mine, assuming this town ever gets one we can afford." For the first time, Dorian's smile disappeared. Rowan almost admired her timing. Almost. Then one of Dorian's men reached for Morrow's lead. Morrow stiffened. Rowan moved. Tessa caught his arm before he took a second step. "Don't," she said under her breath. "Not here." "He doesn't go with them." Dorian's glove tightened around the lead. "The dog is Foundation property. Unlike the box, Sheriff, that part is documented." Tessa's jaw worked. "Dorian, if that dog is harmed, he'll be housed safely pending clarification." Morrow looked at Rowan. No panic, no struggle. That made it worse. His amber eyes held one question, quiet as snow falling on a grave. "Are you staying?" Rowan could have broken Dorian's wrist. He knew exactly how. He could have taken 2 steps, turned the greenhouse into wreckage, and ruined everything they had just begun to build. He did not. That restraint cost him more than violence would have. "I'm coming for you," Rowan said. Morrow's torn ear shifted at the sound of his voice. Then Dorian led him out. The dog limped once, caught himself, and did not look away from Rowan until the door closed. At the sheriff's office, the holding room smelled of old paint, wet wool, and fluorescent light. Rowan sat on a bench with his hands loose between his knees while Tessa took his statement. She did not put him in a cell. That was mercy. It did not feel like enough. Beyond the wall, phones rang. Doors opened. Jonah spoke in low tones. Somewhere, the town went on buying bread, scraping windshields, paying bills, and pretending the hill above them was not casting a longer shadow than yesterday. Tessa finished writing. "I'm sorry," she said. Rowan looked at the floor. Sorry doesn't get him back. No, evidence does. Her voice sharpened, not at him, but at the trap around them. "The box is logged. Lydia is making copies. Nadine is expanding her report. Jonah is pulling plates. This isn't over." Rowan finally looked up. "What happens to Morrow tonight?" Tessa's silence answered first. Then she said, "I'll make calls." After she left, Rowan remained in the holding room beneath the cold light. For years, he had been misunderstood by strangers, commanders, doctors, neighbors who thought quiet meant healed. He could survive that. He had built a whole life out of surviving what people got wrong. But Morrow had trusted him. A dog thrown into a pit had chosen, against all evidence, to believe one more human might be different. And Rowan had watched him be taken. Wind rattled the window. Snow scratched softly at the glass. Rowan took the steel coin from his pocket and turned it between his fingers. Hold fast. He closed his hand around it until the worn edges pressed into his skin. If he walked away now, he would not simply lose Morrow. He would become part of the same soft machinery that had swallowed Winter House, filed away Evelyn's notes, moved the unwanted from warm rooms to cold roads, and called the whole thing responsible management. He had spent years telling himself he lived alone because peace required distance. But peace that depended on leaving others behind was only surrender dressed in clean clothes. Rowan stood. When Tessa returned to release him, he was already at the door. She looked at his face and did not ask whether he was all right. Good sheriff, Rowan thought. Smart woman. What now? She asked. Rowan slipped the coin back into his pocket. Now, he said, we stop treating this like a dog dispute. Outside, night had settled over Brightwater Hollow. The town lights shone against the snow, gentle and golden, as if nothing sacred had been stolen under them. Rowan stepped into the cold. For the first time since leaving the service, he did not feel pulled toward the silence of his cabin. He felt pulled toward the fight waiting beneath the light. By morning, Rowan Mercer had become a story people told in lower voices. Not a long story. Small towns rarely needed long ones. A few sentences were enough to bruise a man.
He had broken into Vale property. He had stolen private documents. He had become unstable over a dog. The last one traveled fastest. It moved through Brightwater Hollow with the snowmelt dripping from awnings and the hiss of tires along Main Street. It passed from the pharmacy counter to the post office line, from a booth at the Maple Lantern to the church basement, where volunteers stacked canned goods beneath fluorescent lights. No one shouted it. That would have been kinder. They only lowered their eyes when Rowan walked past, and lowering eyes could cut deeper than stones. At the gas station, a man who had once asked Rowan to tow his truck out of a ditch suddenly became fascinated by the windshield fluid display. Outside the bakery, a woman Rowan had helped after her roof collapsed gave him a small smile that died before it reached her eyes. Brightwater Hollow still looked beautiful. That was the cruel little joke of it. The snow still shone. The Christmas lights still glowed gold above Main Street. The bakery still smelled of cinnamon, but now the warmth seemed to hesitate when Rowan entered it, as if the town were a dog that had been called by two masters and did not know which voice would bring a beating. He did not blame them. That made it worse. Fear made good people practical. Debt made them polite. Winter made cowards of anyone who had ever watched a heating bill climb higher than hope. Tessa met him outside the sheriff's office before he could reach his truck. She wore her navy parka, hair tucked under a black knit cap, face pale with lack of sleep. Deputy Jonah Reed stood by the cruiser behind her, phone in hand, jaw tight. "You're not charged," Tessa said. "I noticed the lack of confetti. This isn't funny." "No," Rowan said. "It isn't." Jonah stepped forward. The reluctance he had carried the day before was gone, replaced by a grim steadiness that looked new on him. "I got partial plates from the road camera," Jonah said. "Both SUVs belonged to Vale Security through a leasing company in Montpelier. One was logged near the clay access road the night Otis fell." Rowan felt no triumph. Proof did not warm him. "Morrow was still gone," Tessa continued. "Nadine's report is filed. Lydia copied everything from Evelyn's box. Gloria says 3 former Winter House guests. Remember dogs being moved to the old maintenance property after Evelyn died. Where is Morrow?" Tessa's mouth tightened. "That's what we need to prove." Rowan stared at her. She did not flinch. "I can't walk onto every Vale owned acre because Dorian said foundation property. We need a specific location tied to animal welfare risk. Nadine's report shows abuse happened. It doesn't show where he is now." Tessa's voice softened, but only a little. "Rowan, I am building the door. Don't kick the wall down before I finish." He looked away toward Main Street. Across the road, a wreath hung in the window of the town hall. Beneath it, a brass plaque thanked the Vale Foundation for supporting winter emergency relief. The words gleamed like they had never been touched by human hands. "All right," he said. "Then we find the location." "We may have help," Tessa said. Lydia found a name. Maren Holt. Tessa's eyebrows lifted. "You're ahead of me." Evelyn wrote it in the notebook. She was the attorney who drafted early Winter House documents, retired now. "Doesn't answer official inquiries? Then we don't make it official." Gloria was waiting at the Maple Lantern with Otis in a corner booth and a paper bag full of biscuits that she claimed were for morale, and not for Rowan specifically, because she did not reward men who got themselves arrested before breakfast. Otis looked better, which for Otis meant he had regained enough color to insult municipal coffee and threatened to haunt the urgent care if they billed him for gelatin. He tapped his dented tin cup against the table when Rowan sat. "You look terrible," Otis said. "You look like a scarecrow that lost a bar fight." "Good, we're both honest." Gloria set a mug in front of Rowan. "Drink, then drive. We're going to see Maren Holt before she has time to pretend she's dead." Maren lived 20 miles outside Brightwater Hollow, down a road that grew narrower with every mile until it seemed less like a road and more like a rumor between snowbanks. Her farmhouse stood alone on a low rise, gray clapboard, black shutters, smoke curling from a chimney that leaned slightly east. The fields around it lay white and silent beneath a sky the color of pewter. A woman opened the door before they knocked twice. She was 61, tall and spare, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes so gray they seemed carved from winter stone. She wore a black turtleneck, a long camel coat, and the expression of someone who had already decided most visitors were mistakes. "I do not donate to campaigns," she said. "I do not sign petitions. I do not buy raffle tickets, especially if children are involved, which, thankfully, I see they are not." Gloria held up the green notebook. Marin's face changed. "Not much. Enough. Where did you get that?" "Evelyn's greenhouse," Rowan said. Marin looked at him then. Really looked. Measuring the scar across his brow, the olive combat shirt beneath his jacket, the fatigue in his eyes. "You're Mercer, Rowan. You brought trouble back from the hill." "No," Gloria said. "Trouble was living there rent. Free." Marin's mouth almost moved toward a smile, then thought better of it. She stepped aside. Inside, the farmhouse smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and unsweetened tea. Files were stacked in careful towers on the dining room table, though Marin had supposedly left the law years ago. Some people retired from work. Others merely stopped being paid for. She did not sit until she had read 3 pages of Evelyn's notebook. By the 4th, her hand went still. By the 5th, she removed her glasses and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. She knew, Marin said. Rowan stood near the window, watching wind lift snow from the field. What did she know? That Whitaker would turn Winter House into a monument to himself if she did not separate it from him. Marin's voice was quiet, dry, and bitter at the edges. "Evelyn came to me 6 months before she died. She wanted to create an independent board, winter shelter, veteran support, retired working dog care, binding clauses, actual oversight." "Why didn't it happen?" Gloria asked. Marin looked at the notebook as if it were a small coffin. "She got sick faster than she admitted. And She stopped. Otis, who had been unusually silent, leaned forward. "And you?" Marin's eyes flashed. "And I was grieving my husband. And tired. And foolish enough to believe Whitaker's promises that he would honor her wishes until paperwork could be finalized." No one softened the silence for her. She did not ask them to. After a moment, she stood and pulled a folder from a locked cabinet. Inside were draft trust documents, old correspondence, and a winter care charter with Evelyn's notes in the margins. "Not complete," Marin said. "Not enough to transfer control by itself, but enough to show intent, enough to challenge decisions, enough to make a judge listen, if paired with current evidence of misuse or abuse." Tessa's phrase returned to Rowan. Building the door. Marin tapped one section with a fountain pen. "If therapeutic animals registered under the Winter House program are being neglected or harmed, the sheriff can request an emergency welfare inspection of any facility tied to that program." "We need the facility," Rowan said. "Yes." Marin looked at him over her glasses. "And preferably before your temper commits a felony." Otis snorted. "Told you she was charming." Marin turned to him. "Mr. Bell, you still owe me $8 from a poker game in 2009. That was an act of charity. It was a straight flush. It was a cold night. It was fraud." For the first time that day, Rowan almost laughed. The laugh died when he returned to his truck. Morrow's absence filled the cab like another passenger. No breath fogging the rear window, no steady amber gaze in the mirror, no wounded dignity wrapped in bandages and suspicion. Rowan opened the driver's door and stopped. On the rubber floor mat near the back seat, half hidden beneath the edge of the quilt, lay a few strands of old straw. Not hay from his cabin, darker. Damp mixed with grit. He picked them up. They smelled faintly of disinfectant, motor oil, and old urine. Gloria leaned in. "That means something?" "Maybe." Otis sniffed once and recoiled. "Smells like the back end of a hospital married a lawnmower." "Nadine," Rowan said. They drove straight to the clinic. Nadine took the straw from Rowan with tweezers, as if it were both evidence and an insult. She rolled it between gloved fingers, sniffed it, frowned, then went to a cabinet and pulled down an old supply ledger. "Evelyn's dog kennels used this bedding," she said. "Not the new cedar type, this older straw mix, treated with a disinfectant I haven't seen in years." She looked up. "The maintenance center behind Vale's North Service Road used to store it. There were kennels there." Otis snapped his fingers. "Back by the woodlot. There was a door behind the boiler shed. Evelyn had me fix the latch once. I remember because a raccoon judged my craftsmanship." Nadine was already calling Tessa. The inspection order came together by dusk. Not elegant, not sweeping, not dramatic enough for the stories men told about justice. It was a temporary welfare inspection based on veterinary evidence, program registration, witness statements, and the possibility that animals tied to Vale Winter House were being held in unsafe conditions at the old maintenance center. In other words, it was a key. The moon was high when they reached the North Service Road. Snow shone blue beneath it. The maintenance center sat behind the Vale estate, far from the grand driveway, a low cinder-block building with rusted vents and a fenced yard half buried in drifts. It had none of the white stone beauty of the main house. This was where the machinery of elegance came to cough and leak oil. Tessa led the way with Jonah beside her, body camera on. Nadine carried her medical bag and a folder of forms. Rowan walked behind them, every part of him wanting to move faster, and every disciplined piece of him forcing patience. The side door was locked. Tessa knocked. No answer. She knocked again and announced herself. Still nothing. Jonah found the old rear latch Otis had remembered. It was secured with a newer padlock. Tessa looked at Rowan. "Don't." "I didn't move," you thought loudly. Jonah cut the lock with bolt cutters from the cruiser. The door opened into darkness and smell. Dogs, not just one, many. The first bark came from the back, hoarse and uncertain. Then another. Then the scrape of paws on metal. Nadine swore under her breath, and there was no humor in it this time. Flashlights swept over rows of kennels. Some were empty, some were not. An old Labrador with a cloudy eye stood stiffly near a water bowl filled with ice. A gray-muzzled German shepherd lifted his head from soiled bedding. A black and police dog with ribs too visible watched without moving. In the third kennel on the right, Morrow stood bandaged, dirty, alive. Rowan stopped breathing for half a second. Morrow did not rush the gate. He rose slowly, favoring the bad leg, and looked directly at Rowan. Then he looked at the other dogs. Rowan understood before his heart did. "Morrow," he said softly. The shepherd's torn ear flicked. He pressed his shoulder against the kennel door, not toward freedom, but toward the row behind him. Nadine moved from kennel to kennel, her face white with fury. Dehydration, pressure sores, infected paws, no proper heat back here. Tessa, document everything. Jonah was already filming. His earlier hesitation burned clean away. Body cam is running. Phone back up too. Tessa unlocked Morrow's kennel first. The dog stepped out. Pain trembled through him. But he did not go to Rowan. Not yet. He moved to the next kennel and stood there, staring at the old shepherd inside. Rowan felt something in him break open. Not with grief this time, but recognition. He had come to retrieve the one dog who had trusted him. Morrow was asking him to see the rest. Justice, Rowan realized, was not a hand reaching for what it loved and calling the reach noble. Justice was the second door. The third, the last one at the end of the row, where no one was watching. "All of them," Rowan said. Tessa looked at him. "All of them," he repeated. Nadine nodded once, fierce and immediate. "I'll call every foster, rescue, and clinic I know." The front doors banged open. Dorian Pike entered with 2 security men, black coats dusted with snow. His gaze swept the unlocked kennels, the cameras, Tessa's badge, Rowan standing beside Morrow. His face did not change, but his right hand adjusted his glove. You have no authority to be here. Tessa stepped forward. Emergency welfare inspection under state animal cruelty statutes and charitable program registration. Interfere, and I arrest you. Dorian looked at Jonah's camera, then at Nadine's forms, then at Rowan. You think this ends with dogs? Dorian said. No, Rowan said. I think this is where it starts. Dorian gave a short laugh. Whitaker said make the problem disappear. That's all, a dog, some strays. Dead weight nobody wanted. Morrow's body tightened beside Rowan. Rowan did not look away from Dorian. Your problem, he said, is that they're still alive. Dorian moved as if to step past Tessa. She was faster than he expected. Dorian Pike, she said, voice carrying through the kennels. You are being detained for obstruction of an active welfare inspection and suspected animal cruelty pending further investigation. Jonah took his arm. Dorian resisted just enough to show he wanted to, not enough to give them the satisfaction of a fight. As he was led out, he looked back at Rowan. This town will choose heat over your conscience. Rowan stood among the kennels, with Morrow at his side and a dozen tired dogs watching from the shadows. Then we'll bring both. After Dorian was gone, the work began. Not heroic work. Better than that. Real work. Nadine checked wounds. Jonah carried water. Tessa logged each kennel. Rowan opened doors one by one, slow enough not to frighten animals who had learned that open spaces could also be traps. Morrow walked with him. At each kennel the shepherd paused. Some dogs backed away, some stared. One old Labrador leaned forward and touched noses through the bars before stepping out with a sigh so deep it sounded like surrender turning into sleep. The last dog, a scarred sable shepherd, would not move until Morrow entered the kennel and sat beside him for nearly a full minute. No one spoke. Even Gloria, when she arrived with blankets and a van full of volunteers, stopped at the doorway with her hand over her mouth. Otis came too, against everyone's advice, leaning on a cane and wearing 3 coats. He looked at the dogs, then at Rowan. Well, he said, voice rough. Looks like hell had a kennel wing. Gloria elbowed him. Help carry blankets. Profit. By midnight, the maintenance center was no longer quiet. It was filled with low voices, warm water, the rustle of blankets, the click of leashes, the soft whines of animals being touched gently for the first time in too long. Morrow finally came to Rowan when the last kennel stood open. He pressed his head against Rowan's thigh. Not hard. Just enough. Rowan lowered a hand to the dog's neck, fingers resting carefully above the old collar plate. You were right, he said. Morrow closed his eyes. Around them, the forgotten dogs stepped into the moonlit snow one by one, slow and unsteady, like old warriors emerging from a locked hall after someone had finally remembered their names. Whitaker Vale did not fall with Dorian Pike. Men like Whitaker rarely fell because one ugly door had opened. They had lawyers for ugly doors. They had committees to rename them. They had phrases like isolated misconduct, operational oversight, and regrettable lapse in judgment polished and ready before the blood dried on the floor. By noon the next day, Vale Foundation released a statement. It thanked Sheriff Croft for her dedication to community safety. It expressed shock at the conditions found in the old maintenance facility. It promised a full internal review. It referred to the rescued dogs as legacy animals in transitional holding, a phrase so clean it nearly made Rowan put his fist through the radio. He did not. Morrow was asleep at his feet, his bandaged shoulder pressed against the braided rug in Rowan's cabin. The old German shepherd had spent the morning at Nadine's clinic, while the other rescued dogs were divided among volunteers, emergency fosters, and every warm barn Gloria could bully into opening. Morrow had refused to stay at the clinic. Nadine had said he needed rest. Morrow had looked at Rowan. Nadine had said several words not fit for polite church bulletins, and sent them both home with antibiotics, strict instructions, and a warning that if Rowan let the dog overexert himself, she would personally staple him to a chair. Now Morrow slept like a creature that had won one battle and did not yet trust the war to pause. Rowan sat at the kitchen table with Gloria, Lydia, Tessa, Jonah, Nadine, Otis, and Maren Holt. The cabin had never held so many people at once. It seemed faintly offended by the crowd. Gloria had brought soup in a large pot and declared that revolution without soup was just poor planning. Lydia had brought folders. Maren had brought legal pads. Tessa had brought the face of a woman who had not slept, but had decided sleep could file a complaint later. Otis had brought his tin cup and a wool blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a retired prophet who had misplaced his mountain. Jonah stood near the stove, phone in hand, reading the Vale Foundation statement for the third time. "They're blaming Dorian," he said. "Of course they are," Maren replied. "That is why wealthy men hire brutal men, so cruelty can have an employee number." Tessa rubbed her forehead. "Dorian's lawyer is already saying he acted outside policy." Outside policy? Those dogs were starving inside his policy. Rowan looked at the map on the table. The Vale estate, the maintenance center, the town hall, the lakeshore property marked for Whitaker's new development. "He'll survive this," Rowan said. The words made the room quiet because everyone knew they were true. Whitaker still had money. He still had 2 council members who owed him favors. He still had a winter gala scheduled for that evening in the town hall ballroom, where he intended to announce the transformation of Vale Winter House into the Evelyn Vale Legacy Retreat and Wellness Center. Gloria had shown Rowan the invitation earlier, embossed paper, silver lettering, a painting of the lake beneath falling snow. Not one mention of shelter beds, not one mention of retired working dogs, not one mention of the people Evelyn used to let in through the back door when the front door looked too grand for their shame. "Then we don't let him define the night," Gloria said. Maren glanced up. "Legally? Morally? That is less binding. It lasts longer." Gloria stood and went to Rowan's sink as if she owned it. She filled a kettle, set it on the stove, and turned back to the group. Evelyn used to hold the white lantern night before the first deep freeze. People brought candles to the square, read names of those who had nowhere to go, fed whoever came. No tickets, no speeches, no polished nonsense, just soup, light, and the truth. Lydia's face softened. "I have photographs." "You have photographs of the moon sneezing?" Gloria said. "Of course you do." Otis tapped his cup on the table. "Evelyn made me read once." "You read 3 lines and cried into your stew," Gloria said. "It was spicy stew. It was chicken." Rowan listened, but his eyes had gone to Morrow. The dog had opened one eye at the word Evelyn. His torn ear shifted. That small movement changed the room more than a shouted plan could have. Everyone saw it. The dog did not understand meetings or press statements or development deals, but he knew the sound of a name that had once meant safety. Rowan looked back at Gloria. "Tonight, before Whitaker's gala." Tessa leaned back. "That puts half the town in one place and his donors in another." "No," Lydia said softly. "It asks them which place they belong." Maren clicked her pen once. "I can speak to Evelyn's draft documents, carefully. I will not overstate what they prove." "Nadine can speak to the dogs," Gloria said. "I can speak to what I saw," Otis added. Tessa looked toward Rowan. "And you?" He had spent his life avoiding rooms where people expected him to explain his heart. "I don't do speeches." Gloria pointed a wooden spoon at him. "Good speeches are what Whitaker does. You just tell the truth without dressing it for dinner." By late afternoon, Brightwater Hollow began to choose. Not loudly. At first only a few candles appeared in the square. Gloria set up tables with soup pots beside the town's old stone fountain, now frozen under a cap of snow. Jonah helped string plain white lanterns from the bare maple trees. Lydia pinned old photographs to corkboards. Evelyn in a wool hat ladling stew. Morrow young and bright-eyed beside a cot. Otis with less beard and more teeth holding a bowl, as if daring anyone to call it charity. Across the street, the town hall blazed with warm light for Whitaker's gala. Men in dark coats carried floral arrangements through the side door. A catering van unloaded trays beneath silver covers. Through the tall windows, Rowan saw white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a banner painted with the words honoring legacy, building tomorrow. On the square, Gloria stirred soup in a dented steel pot. Building tomorrow, Otis muttered. Funny how tomorrow always needs poor folks to move out of its way. Nadine arrived with two of the rescued dogs in heated coats. An old Labrador named Pearl leaned against her leg. A retired police shepherd stood near Jonah, thin but alert. People stopped when they saw them. Some crossed the street from the gala line. Most only looked. Rowan stood at the edge of the square with Morrow beside him. The shepherd wore his repaired leather collar and a plain green harness. Snow touched the torn tip of his ear. His bad leg trembled after only a short walk, but he refused to lie down. "You don't have to stand guard over everybody," Rowan said. Morrow looked up at him. Rowan sighed. "Fine, but if Nadine yells, I'm blaming you." The first person to speak was a woman Rowan barely knew, Mrs. Albright from the old road near the lake. She stepped forward holding a white candle in both hands. Her voice was small, but the square had gone quiet enough to carry it. "My husband died in February 11 years ago," she said. "Power was out. Roads were closed. I had no generator. Evelyn Vale sent 2 men with firewood and a dog who would not leave my porch until someone brought me to Winter House." She glanced at Morrow. "I don't know if it was him, but I remember not being alone." She set the candle near the fountain. Then a former carpenter named Dale Sutter spoke about being pushed to sell his lakeside cabin after Whitaker's development office called it blighted property. Then a retired state trooper told how one of Evelyn's therapy dogs had sat with him through a winter, when he could not sleep more than an hour without shaking. No one made grand speeches. That was the power of it. The stories came plain. Plain things were harder to kill. A few donors in evening coats drifted out of town hall, drawn by the sound of names being spoken in the cold. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked annoyed. Some simply looked as if they had walked into the wrong room of their own conscience. Otis stepped up wearing the burgundy scarf Evelyn had given him years before, now cleaned and wrapped carefully at his throat. Gloria had patched his coat. He still looked like Otis, thin, stubborn, slightly betrayed by the existence of buttons, but he stood straighter than Rowan had ever seen him. "My name is Otis Bell," he said. "I sleep where the wind lets me. Some of you pretend not to know that. It's all right. I pretend not to know plenty about you, too." A few nervous laughs moved through the crowd. Otis waited until they faded. "3 nights ago, I saw men from Vale Security throw a sack into the old clay pit. There was a dog inside, Morrow." His voice shook, then steadied. "I went down because Evelyn Vale once went out in a storm for me when I smelled worse than that pit and had less charm than I currently possess." More laughter, softer this time. "She did not ask if I deserved warmth. She opened a door. That was her kind of charity. It did not need witnesses." Otis lifted his candle. "I saw what I saw." He placed the candle down. Nadine spoke next. No emotion wasted, no fact softened. She described restraint marks, dehydration, untreated wounds, the dogs found in the maintenance center. She did not call Whitaker cruel. She did not need to. The details did the work. Lydia displayed the photographs of Winter House as it had been. Evelyn with mud on her boots, Morrow beside cots, volunteers carrying blankets, the old greenhouse full of lavender and folded towels. Marin Holt stepped forward last among them. Slim and severe in her camel coat, silver hair bright under the lanterns. "Evelyn Vale came to me before her death," she said. "She intended to separate Winter House from personal control and place it under an independent board. The documents were incomplete when she died. That matters legally." She held up the folder. "But what also matters is that Whitaker Vale knew her intent. He knew what she feared. He knew what she tried to protect." Across the street, the gala doors opened. Whitaker Vale descended the town hall steps. He wore a charcoal suit beneath a black overcoat, a pale blue tie, and the laurel pin on his lapel. He looked immaculate, wounded, and entirely prepared. The crowd turned. Whitaker smiled with sorrowful patience. "Friends," he said, voice carrying easily, "I understand emotions are high. My wife was beloved. I loved her too. Everything I have done has been to preserve her legacy in a sustainable way." Rowan felt Morrow go still beside him. Whitaker continued. "The conditions discovered at the old maintenance site were unacceptable. Mr. Pike has been removed, but we must not allow grief and misinformation to destroy years of good work. The new retreat will bring jobs, medical support, tourism revenue, and dignity to this town." "Dignity for who?" someone called. Whitaker's smile held. "For all of us," Gloria whispered. "That man could butter toast with a lie." Whitaker turned toward Rowan. "Mr. Mercer has suffered much in service to this country. No one questions his courage, but trauma can make a man see enemies where there are only complicated decisions." There it was. Not a knife. A white glove laid over a blade. Rowan felt the crowd shift. Sympathy and doubt were cousins, and Whitaker knew how to invite both. Morrow pressed his head against Rowan's thigh. Not for comfort. For grounding, Rowan stepped forward. He did not climb onto the fountain. He did not raise his voice like a man in a movie. He stood in the snow beside a wounded dog and spoke as if talking to one neighbor across a fence. "I don't blame anyone here for being afraid," he said. The square quieted. "I know why people take Vale money. Heat matters, medicine matters, jobs matter. I've seen enough cold places to know pride doesn't keep a person alive through the night." Whitaker watched him carefully. Rowan continued. "But there's a difference between helping a town stand and teaching it to kneel. Evelyn Vale opened doors. Whitaker Vale bought locks and called them progress." A murmur moved through the crowd. Rowan looked toward the town hall. The white tablecloths, the banner. The lights paid for by a man who had mistaken brightness for mercy. "I found Otis in a clay pit. I found Morrow in a sack. We found the other dogs behind a locked door. If this is what gets hidden so the town can look beautiful, then maybe we need to ask what beauty is costing us." For a moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Albright stepped forward again. "My property was appraised at half its value after I refused to sell." Dale Sutter added. "Vale Development sent 3 letters threatening code complaints." Another voice rose. "My brother was turned away from Winter House last January." Another. "I saw dogs moved at night." Another. "Invoices for the gala went through the winter relief account. I processed them." That last voice belonged to a young woman in a caterer's black coat standing near the town hall steps. Her face had gone pale, but she did not take the words back. The frozen river under the town began to crack, not violently. Honestly, Tessa stepped into the lantern light. Jonah stood beside her. Recording, she held a folder in one hand and did not look at Whitaker when she spoke to the crowd. "Based on witness statements, veterinary findings, recovered documents, and evidence collected at the Vale Maintenance Facility, my office is opening a formal investigation into Vale Foundation operation. I am requesting the Town Council immediately suspend all pending agreements connected to the lakeside development until state review is complete." One of the councilmen near the gala entrance began protesting. Another did not. He was staring at the rescued dogs. Lydia had already sent copies of the documents to 2 reporters from the Burlington paper, who stood near the fountain taking notes with the hungry restraint of people who knew a story had just opened its throat. Whitaker saw them. That was when his smile finally failed. Only briefly, but Rowan saw it. The town saw it too. Whitaker did not shout. He did not lunge. He did not confess like a villain in a cheap play. He stood beneath the gold lights. His money had strung above Main Street, and discovered that light could be an ungrateful thing. Given enough of it, people started seeing. Marin approached the nearest council member with the draft documents. Gloria handed soup to a woman in an evening gown who was crying into her gloves. Otis sat down hard on the fountain edge, muttering that public courage was exhausting and should come with better seating. Snow kept falling. White lanterns swung gently in the wind. Morrow sat beside Rowan, head high, torn ear dusted with flakes. He did not bark. He did not need to. Around him the rescued dogs lay under blankets at the feet of strangers who had, one by one, stopped being strangers. Whitaker turned and walked back toward Town Hall, but no one followed him. Not at first. Then one donor removed his black overcoat, laid it over the shoulders of the old Labrador named Pearl, and crossed the square toward Gloria's soup table. Another followed. Then another. It was not a revolution. It was quieter and more difficult. It was a town remembering the shape of its own spine. Rowan looked down at Morrow. "You seeing this?" The dog leaned, just slightly against his leg, across the square. The white lanterns burned in the snow, bright dark, not loud, not triumphant, simply steady. And for the first time in years, Brightwater Hollow's light belonged to more than the man who had paid for it. The morning after the white lanterns, Brightwater Hollow woke to a quieter kind of cold. Not the sharp cold that bit cheeks and froze truck doors shut. This was the cold that came after truth had been spoken aloud, when everyone had to walk through the same streets and remember what they had heard. The gold lights still hung above Main Street. The town hall still stood across from the square. The Vale Foundation plaque still gleamed beside the municipal steps. But something had shifted beneath it all. The town had not been saved in one night. No choir descended. No villain vanished into the snow. There were forms to file, statements to give, dogs to treat, rooms to heat, and bills waiting with their little paper teeth. Justice, Rowan was learning, did not arrive like thunder. Most days, it arrived with a clipboard. Dorian Pike was charged first. Animal cruelty. Witness intimidation. Obstruction. Destruction of records. Tessa moved carefully, building each count with Nadine's veterinary reports, Jonah's camera footage, the trail camera images, and Otis's sworn statement. Dorian's lawyer tried to make him sound like a man who had misunderstood instructions. Otis, when told this, said, "I once misunderstood a soup label and ate clam chowder cold. I did not accidentally throw a dog in a pit." No one in Tessa's office had the strength to argue. Whitaker Vale was harder. Men like him did not leave fingerprints where fingerprints could embarrass them. But Marin knew how to follow language. Lydia knew how to follow missing records. Jonah knew how to follow vehicle logs and deleted files. Gloria knew how to follow shame, which was sometimes more reliable than paperwork. Within 2 weeks, the state opened a formal review into Vale Foundation finances. The Lakeside Retreat project was suspended. Foundation accounts were temporarily frozen. The town council, after 3 meetings, 2 resignations, and one man loudly discovering a conscience after reporters arrived, voted to halt all agreements connected to Whitaker's development plan. Whitaker did not appear in public. His house still glowed on the hill, but now it looked less like a beacon and more like a lantern left burning in an empty room. That should have felt like victory. Instead, Brightwater Hollow faced the question Whitaker had used for years, like a chain wrapped in velvet. Who would pay for the light now? The first answer came from Gloria, because Gloria distrusted questions that stood around feeling important. She opened the kitchen at the old Winter House before anyone had permission to call it Winter House again. The building sat below the hill road half, hidden by pine trees, its white paint peeling, gutters bent, front steps sagging beneath snow. The fancy Vale sign had been removed for evidence. Beneath it, the old wooden outline of the original sign remained like a ghost. Gloria walked in with 3 soup pots, a crate of onions, and the expression of a woman prepared to fight both poverty and plumbing. "Well," she said, surveying the cracked tile floor, "it's ugly cold and smells like mice held a town meeting. We'll start with soup." The church lent folding cots. A retired plumber named Earl fixed 2 bathroom pipes for free, and only complained loudly enough to count as music. Jonah brought 3 local carpenters and rebuilt the kennel doors. He worked silently, most of the first day, as if each screw he drove into fresh wood was an apology for how long he had waited to believe. Nadine arrived with medicine, donated blankets, and 2 vet students from Burlington who looked terrified of her and therefore worked efficiently. Lydia created a historical preservation file thick enough to stun a moose. Marin found a clause in Evelyn's draft papers that allowed a temporary community board to petition for emergency stewardship if the Foundation's active manager was under investigation. She described it as thin but useful, which, from Marin, sounded like a blessing from the Supreme Court. Tessa kept the legal wolves from the door. Otis swept floors badly. He also stood at the entrance and told every newcomer, "Don't trip on the second step. It's got ambitions." Rowan came to fix the roof. That was all, at least. That was what he told himself. He patched shingles, replaced rotten boards, repaired the back stovepipe, hung new latches, hauled firewood, cleared the path to the kennels, and built a ramp for the older dogs. He worked from dawn until his shoulder ached and his hands stiffened inside his gloves. People kept asking him questions. Where should the kennel beds go? Could this room hold 4 cots or 6? Would Morrow tolerate another dog beside the stove? Could Rowan check the lock on the side door? Could Rowan speak to the reporter? Could Rowan please stop pretending he was not in charge? He answered the practical ones. He ignored the last. One afternoon, Gloria found him outside measuring lumber near the kennel run. Snow dusted his hair and the shoulders of his olive combat shirt. Morrow lay nearby on a thick blanket, wearing his green harness, watching a rescued old Labrador sleep in a patch of weak sun. "You know," Gloria said, "leadership looks a lot like a man avoiding the word leadership." Rowan kept measuring boards in charge. The board has 5 people, 3 opinions, and 1 working coffee maker. You're the one everyone looks for when something starts leaking, growling, or morally collapsing. I fix things. Gloria's face softened in a way that made Rowan immediately suspicious. Sometimes fixing a place means staying long enough for people to trust the repair. He marked the board with a pencil. Soup burning. She narrowed her eyes. Coward. Probably. Useful coward, then. She went back inside before he could answer, leaving him alone with the saw, the snow, and the uncomfortable possibility that she was right. Morrow recovered slowly, not beautifully. Recovery was rarely beautiful up close. It was pills hidden in chicken, dressing changes he hated, careful walks through packed snow, and nights when the clang of a dropped pan made him flatten to the floor before he remembered he was safe. His right hind leg never returned fully to what it had been. In deep cold, it stiffened. When he was tired, his gait took on a slight hitch, but he carried that hitch like a battle ribbon no one had pinned on him. He became the heart of the reopened house without asking for the role. A woman who arrived one night after sleeping in her car sat on the edge of a cot, hands shaking too hard to hold soup. Morrow crossed the room, lowered himself beside her boots, and placed his head on the floor near her feet. He did not touch her. He simply stayed. She slept 4 hours. Otis began walking Morrow every morning down Main Street. In truth, Morrow walked Otis, but both were too proud to admit it. The old man would lean on his cane and announce to anyone watching, "This is my security detail, highly trained, terrible at cards." Morrow accepted the title with solemn patience. At Rowan's cabin the changes were smaller but more dangerous. The front door no longer stayed locked during daylight. A water bowl sat on the porch. A stack of split wood appeared beside the road with a sign Lydia had written in neat letters, "Take what you need. Return kindness when possible." Rowan pretended not to know who had improved the wording after his original sign, which had only said wood. There was a second chair by the stove now. At first, it had been for Otis when he came by after morning walks. Then Gloria sat in it. Then Tessa. Once Nadine fell asleep there for 17 minutes and woke threatening to deny it under oath. Rowan still preferred quiet, But the quiet had changed. It was no longer a locked room. It was a hearth between visits. One night, after a long day repairing the Winter House back porch, Rowan woke from a dream he did not remember, except for the taste of metal and dust. His hand went for a weapon that was not there. His breath came hard. Before the dark could close around him, weight pressed gently against his chest. Morrow had climbed halfway onto the couch, bad leg awkward, head resting over Rowan's heart, not pinning him, not demanding. Reminding, Rowan stared at the ceiling until his breathing slowed. Then he placed one hand on Morrow's neck, above the old leather collar with Evelyn's laurel plate. "Still here," he whispered. The dog exhaled. This time Rowan was not sure which of them had said it first. Months passed with the stubborn patience of winter releasing its grip one icicle at a time. The state appointed an independent board to take temporary control of Vale Winter House pending the outcome of the investigation. Whitaker's lawyers objected. Marin smiled in court for the first time in years, which frightened everyone on both sides. The board voted to restore the original name, Vale Winter House, not the Evelyn Vale Legacy Retreat, not the Lakeside Wellness Center, not any phrase that sounded like it had been invented by a man allergic to soup kitchens, just Winter House. A local woodworker carved a new sign from cedar. Evelyn's name appeared below it, simple and clear. At the bottom, Otis insisted on adding a line. He carved it himself in uneven letters, while Rowan stood nearby pretending the spelling did not worry him. "No one gets thrown away here." When the sign went up, no one clapped at first. People only stood there in the snow, reading it. Some cried. Otis cleared his throat and said, "Well, don't all admire my craftsmanship at once. The sign can't handle fame." That broke the moment enough for laughter. Good laughter, wet-eyed, human, imperfect. The old clay pit was filled in early spring, though snow still lingered in the shaded parts of the woods. The town did not pave it over. That had been Lydia's suggestion. "If we cover every wound too neatly," she said, "future generations mistake scars for design." So they marked the place instead, not with marble, not with bronze, with cedar posts, a rough rail fence, and a promise to plant lavender when the ground softened. On a pale morning when the sky looked washed clean, Rowan drove Otis and Morrow to the old access road. The tire tracks were long gone. The pit had become a smooth white hollow, quiet beneath fresh snow. Far below, Brightwater Hollow lay in the valley, its roofs shining, smoke rising, the town lights dim now in daylight. But still there, Otis stood beside the rail, leaning on his cane. "You know," he said, "if this lavender doesn't grow, I'm blaming you." Rowan looked at him. "Me? You military types dig holes for a living? Planting is just digging with optimism." That may be the worst definition of gardening I've ever heard, yet memorable. Morrow sat between them, torn ear lifted to the wind, gold-black coat bright against the snow. The gray around his muzzle had become more visible. So had the pale mark on his chest, the little flame of fur that Evelyn had once touched. Perhaps without knowing what it would come to mean, Rowan looked down at him. 3 months earlier, the dog had been pulled from a sack at the bottom of this place, broken, freezing, but still trying to guard men he did not know. Rowan had thought then that he was saving Morrow. That had been only half true. A bell rang faintly from town. The sound traveled up through the trees, softened by snow. Otis wiped his nose with a glove. Cold day for a sentimental ending. Who said it's ending? The old man smiled. Below them, Winter House stood with smoke rising from its chimney. Someone had shoveled the front path. Someone had left bread at the kitchen door. Someone had hung a white lantern under the new sign, though it was morning, and no light was needed. Rowan understood now. Light given freely did not always blaze. Sometimes it waited beside a door, modest and stubborn, until someone lost found their way to it. He rested his hand on Morrow's head. "Ready to go home, old man?" Morrow leaned into his palm. "Not much enough." They walked back toward the truck together. The former SEAL who had once mistaken loneliness for peace. The old homeless man who had fallen into a pit and dragged a town's conscience up with him, and the wounded German shepherd who had been thrown away but refused to become a forgotten thing. Snow began to fall again, light as breath. This time, it did not feel like a cover. It felt like forgiveness taking its time.